Hello, educators, and welcome to the webinar on blended learning, making it work in your classroom, sponsored by Edmentum. We're so glad that you could join us. We have folks on the call from all over the United States and abroad, which just goes to show how much this topic has infiltrated our vernacular. We cannot seem to get enough of blended learning. My name is Nikki Simon Burton, and I am a training consultant at Edmentum and will serve as your facilitator for today's session. A few housekeeping things before we get started. I want to make sure to introduce you to the GoToWebinar technology. You should now see two different components on your computer screen. A large viewer window, like the one you see on the slide, and then a smaller control panel where you can access the different participation features during today's session. Today we will be using the questions box when we ask you a question and want you to provide feedback in. We'll also be using polls, and we have also placed a few items in the handout section as well for you to keep and reference after the webinar. We will give you a chance to raise your hand to participate, and you can see the little hand icon to raise your hand if you want to ask a question throughout the seminar or if you want to participate when we open for live dialogue. Now that we've sorted all of that out, allow me to introduce you to our subject matter expert today. Tony Skauge has worked in the education field for over 15 years. He has worked as a sixth grade teacher, an education specialist at the Science Museum of Minnesota, and as an implementation consultant and virtual programs manager here at Edmentum. Tony has worked with hundreds of schools, both traditional and online, across the country to set up, implement, and refine online learning best practices. He has focused his career on helping school district administrators and educators create learning environments that are inclusive, innovative, and that incorporate technology in new and creative ways to help students achieve success.
Thank you so much for a wonderful preamble there. I appreciate that, Nikki. And good morning and welcome everybody to our webinar. I am more than excited to be able to take everybody through this topic today, blended learning, and some different ways to make it work in your classroom. So let's go ahead and get started this morning, and I'd like to be true to time today, so I'll make sure we leave some time near the end of our webinar today to field some questions if you have any. And like Nikki said here just a moment ago, don't hesitate to put those in the chat if something jumps out at you. Let's go ahead and move on to just a quick review of our agenda for today's webinar so that we have some really clear and set expectations and outcomes for our time together today. Today we're really going to start by focusing on some blended learning definitions and some research. We're going to talk a little bit about the overview of some models, some benefits, some considerations, and we're going to jump into some of those success stories, some research behind some of these different models. We'll talk about the impact of student choice and agency within blended learning, and we're going to wrap up with some next steps, including some questions going forward. So let's go ahead, let's get started, and I'd like to go through and begin today with a little bit about you, a quick poll to really kind of kick things off. And the poll question today really is, how often are your students taught using a blended learning approach at your school?
So a poll should be up on your screen. Go ahead, read through the options, select the one that fits best for your current school or district that you're representing on the call today. We'll take just a few seconds as we're collecting all of those votes.
Perfect. This looks great. Thank you for taking the time to put in your responses here. We're getting some terrific responses. It looks like a majority of folks are kind of landing in that spot B there, where we're hoping to kind of start doing some more blended learning soon. And I'll tell you what, you've come to the exact right place to do some of that, so we can talk a little bit more about really what blended learning is, how we're moving through this process, and really some different ways to implement this within your classroom. So terrific. Thank you for going ahead and putting those in. And we'll have more opportunities as we progress through today to interact a bit more with one another to get a better idea of where we're all at. So let's go ahead and start with this slide, and I really like the term of this, why all the fuss, right? Why all the fuss related to blended learning? What is that buzzword? What is that terminology going through? And really, let's start with a definition. This is a question around blended learning that I actually get asked almost each and every day. And really, the definition that I'm going to lay out for you here, I think, is a really clean way to give you a solid idea of exactly what blended learning is. So really, there are three parts of this definition. The first part really focusing on that formal education program, which that student really learns at least in part, right, through that online delivery of content and instruction. But the key piece I want to highlight here is that student agency, that control over the time, the place, the path, or even the pace of the content. The second part talks about that supervision, right, that brick and mortar. Doing blended learning effectively takes an educator who is skilled, who is adept at using technology, and who's also flexible, and that's a big part of this definition. The third piece is making sure you're hitting those unique learning modalities going forward for students. So that I think this definition really gives you a solid framework or a big overview of exactly what blended learning is. And I think you're starting to see how blended learning just goes beyond the one-to-one, right? It goes beyond the technology in the classroom. It really gives that student control over this entire aspect of moving kind of forward in their learning environment. Let's talk about this connected learning and kind of what this looks like. And I really like this graphic, and I'm going to make you hold here for a second to kind of build a little anticipation here. But I think the words individualized, the words personalized and differentiated, they really get thrown around a lot in the education world, and they become synonymous at times with one another. And I think when you take that term differentiation, right, going through focusing in differentiation on making sure that you're providing learning or instruction that's tailored to meet those individual student needs, and you combine that, okay, with that unique aspect of individualized learning where we're teaching which content or instructional technology, and that pace is really focused on the abilities, on the interests of your learners, and that focuses on that when. So we're combining that how and that when to create that personalized learning experience for your students. And what makes that personalized learning experience so unique for your students is because you're really tailoring that content, that learning environment. You're tailoring that entire component to your students' learning needs and aspirations, and that technology is what's used to facilitate that blended learning process in the classroom. So I think this is a great time to start with what are others saying, right? Well, what are our peers, what are researchers around the country saying about blended learning? And I think I put together here a couple different good snapshots of exactly what others are saying about this. And I'm not going to read all of these here. I wanted to give you a solid overview, but I like the second one in particular here that I'm going to highlight, where experts at that Evergreen Education group really estimate that over 75% of school districts are currently offering some aspect of online or blended learning components to their students. And I think that's really unique. I will say that that online component, right, that speaks to some ambiguity there of the term of blended or online learning and education. But really all of this research, all of this focused interest in blended learning points to a shift, a large shift in education. And I think that shift is really more and more pronounced across each and every school district. And that shift has really helped us as a company here at Edmentum really kind of create or shape our view of blended learning. And really, in our view, at its core, blended learning really is that instructional practice. It's not just that technology plan, right? It's not just integrating some aspect of one-to-one or BYOD, bring your own device. We're not just focused on the apps. We're really looking to help teachers, to help students reach their success, reach their goals each and every day. It's the thing, right? It's a thing that enables teachers to handle the other district initiatives. It's that point that you can leverage in your classrooms to make sure your students are getting exactly what they need going forward. And really, it's a lot more. And that's really what we're going to start to work to next, is talk a little bit about the blended learning models from an overview standpoint. So as we spoke a little bit about earlier, blended learning really combines the best of both online and face-to-face education, and is really defined as that formal education program where that student learns, at least in part, through that online learning like we looked at a little bit earlier. Okay, now I really like this graphic. I think this graphic really helps show the four major models that are really predominantly being used in blended learning implementations across the country. And so I'm going to start here. We're going to move left to right with that rotational model. I think this rotation model gives you a really good starting spot, and hopefully you'll identify with some of the characteristics of this model that you might already be doing in your classroom today. You might not just be labeling it as blended learning. So let's dive in a little bit with some of the different rotational models, and we'll walk through some of these in a bit more depth. The first part I want to highlight here is that within the rotation model, there are really four different variations that are commonly used through here. Now, this definition of this rotation model and this graphic here, I think is really solid when it comes to giving you a solid overview of what this can look like. We've sourced this from the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation, and I think it gives you a really good snapshot of these models and what they might look like within the classroom. So let's dive in a little bit deeper to get a good feel for what we're looking at. So we just saw a terrific question come in here into the chat. What is BYOD? So I'm going to stop and pause for a moment because I'm going to reference that a bit more as we progress through today's session. BYOD is an acronym that is typically used to explain the bring your own device trend we're seeing in some sites across the country. The BYOD, or bring your own device, is a unique term where school districts will often allow students to bring in their own computers, their own phones to access content, whether online or otherwise. So that's a great question coming into chat, and I want to stop and make sure we get that addressed going forward. Terrific. So let's talk a little bit about this rotation model. We spoke a little earlier that students rotate here on a fixed schedule, right, between learning in an online and self-paced environment and then participating in that classroom with a face-to-face teacher. That face-to-face teacher not only provides that direct instruction, but they also oversee that online work. Tons and tons of benefits. I wanted to give you an idea of what you might see in an implementation here, right, where the teacher walks through that integrated math or that tutorial, that direct instruction lesson, whole group on, say, a smartboard projected. Then students then break out and work in an in-lesson activity in smaller groups in that collaborative space. And students then take the mastery test or formative assessment on that device. Tons and tons of benefits there, and we'll highlight each of these, but one of the big benefits is allowing students to work at their own pace through this process, but also that ability to take that assessment, that mastery test in this case, on that device so that that instantaneous feedback is provided to those educators so they can see, hey, this is where my students are at, this is where I might need to pivot and adjust instruction. Really, rotational models are one of the most utilized models in schools, and again, I'm hoping some of you will see some things that jump out at you saying, hey, we're doing this, right? We've done this, or we're doing aspects of this in our classroom. But let's dig in a little bit more. Let's take a little deeper look at what this station rotation model, for instance, might actually look like in a classroom. So here again is another terrific graphic, I think, that gives you a solid overview of what a station rotation model is. And really, within this rotation model, there's typically a given course or subject focus, so it could be reading, for instance, or math as a holistic view, or you could go deeper and say an Algebra 1 course. But really the thought process here is that students rotate between those different learning modalities with, again, at least one of these being an online learning component. Other modalities might be hit on in small group or full class instruction, but that flexibility that allows educators to go through and pivot and adjust instruction as students move to them based upon flexible grouping models or the way that they've arranged their classroom really is what makes this blended learning implementation so successful, because you're meeting those individual students' needs as you go through. The stations can really vary from lesson to lesson. Sometimes 2 stations will be appropriate, and sometimes you might need 3 or even more. So there's a lot of opportunities for different stations that you can go through and highlight. And I think some of the benefits and considerations here lay out nicely really why this model is so popular, and obviously you're seeing quite a few more benefits and considerations here. I wanted to put together a little bit more depth for you too around what this could look like. So as you're seeing things today, as you're seeing some of these models, you're going to be driving these back to your site, right? Back to your classrooms, your teachers, thinking, how could this look in my room? And I think that this model gives you a solid overview of, okay, how could I arrange this in a classroom? And really, the station rotation model typically naturally just fits in that primary classrooms typically due to the preponderance of center-based classrooms, but it can still be implemented very successfully at a secondary level as well. Lots and lots of options there as you're kind of progressing and seeing a bit more about the content moving forward. Another great question just came into chat. Will we have access to this transcript after the webinar? Absolutely. I appreciate that, Brittany. That is a terrific question, and we will make sure you get access to this. We have a variety of documents as well that we put on the right-hand side of your screen in your handouts functionality too. We'll cover those in a bit more depth here, but I know this is a lot coming at you today, so we want to make sure you get each and every bit of this today, and I'll make sure you also have access to me as well via email or otherwise, so we can contact if you have some more specific questions. Terrific question, Brittany, and I appreciate it. So I think you have a solid overview of what the station rotation model looks like, and I like to start out with this because I think a lot of people have that hey, I've done this, right? I know what this could look like in my classroom. Adding a piece of technology in here, I think, would only enhance that, and that's that shift from doing a typical station rotation model to implementing a blended learning station rotation model. It's implementing that technology that gives students agency in that classroom, that provides that data to students, to educators in a way that is both on time, but also is consumable and allows them to make more informed instructional decisions moving forward. Let's talk a little bit about the next rotation model we highlighted, and this is the lab rotation model. So again, this will probably look familiar to some folks on the phone today, because in this model, students typically rotate on a fixed schedule among locations on a campus. So at least one of these spaces in most cases is a lab, while the additional classrooms house other learning modalities, so maybe your direct instruction classroom. And I want you to notice here how space is really the key, as students are moving really actively from lab to lab rather than station to station. So there's a ton of flexibility here as you begin to incorporate those CTE driven components possibly as well. So if you have some career and technical education initiatives at your district you want to help implement, this is a great way to do it, because you can dedicate some lab space not only to some unique unique ways to integrate content or technology, but also to put a different blended learning spin on your initial classroom. So tons of different benefits and considerations here that you can look through as well. But I really wanted to highlight some of the differences between the station rotation model and a lab rotation model, and to kind of jump off of that again, what could this look like, right? What could this look like in my room with my educators, with my students? And what I want to point out here is the key in most cases to this lab rotation is developing that frequency that works for your class, for your teachers, right? You want to give your students enough online time that you can collect actual data on your learners' needs, and then you can rotate them back into those live lessons using that data to drive that instruction, right? So you know exactly what you want to focus and highlight on. Additionally, you're going to need to manage that pace, right, in which the project days benefit or move through for those students. So for instance, if you have students at a variety of different places within that content, take into consideration the fact that students are moving at those different paces through that content is something you want to make sure when you're working with your teammates to look at the next 3 weeks of instruction or use that data to inform that instruction. You keep that in the back of your mind moving forward. Perfect. So we got some more great questions coming in. So Brittany, start by saying sorry for all the questions. Do not apologize, Brittany, for questions. These are terrific. Brittany asked, do students all start in the online learning stations to start? How do you manage these groups at each place? Do the students all start at different locations in the rotation model? All terrific questions. I'm going to start with the first one really briefly here, Brittany. Basically, typically in the station rotation model, you will have a subset of your students starting at one of those online labs and then rotating through that classroom. So potentially kind of going back to that slide we looked at earlier, and forgive me, I'll go back really quick just to show you. You might have students starting today on a Monday on that online learning component up here in the rotation model, and then you might have students, another small set of students on a Tuesday starting at this online learning. Depending upon how you arrange that schedule in your classroom, that's how you're going to kind of work back and determine who's there. The next question is really, how do I go through and manage these groups? That management piece, I think, Brittany, you hit on something really crucial there. Classroom management is key when it comes to implementing any of these different techniques. But classroom management in the station rotation model is even more pronounced in the sense that students have a high degree of flexibility to move through here. So having students practice those skills is going to take a little time, but practicing those skills over and over and making that rote for students is going to pay off dividends in the end. And typically students who are experiencing success in those online learning components really gravitate to those stations. So it feels natural because they want to go back, they want to spend quality time with the educator, they want to move to different environments, and that pace doesn't seem to bother them at all. And the last one is, do students all start at different locations? Yeah, but in most cases in that rotation model, everyone's starting, depending upon the day, like we talked about, kind of moving from one place to the next. Those, Brittany, are terrific, terrific questions. I really appreciate those coming in. So let's jump back here. We talked a little bit about the lab rotation, secondary classroom model, what that can look like. Let's talk about the flipped classroom for a moment. So the flipped classroom is a model that I hear a lot of folks refer to right away when they hear blended learning because it's one a lot of folks have heard about. In the flipped classroom model, students typically rotate on a fixed schedule again, but between face-to-face, like teacher-guided or direct instruction practice on campus during the school day, and they move back or transition into online instruction, that same subject, in a remote location, typically done after school. Very popular, very well publicized blended learning technique, and really, if it's done right, can be transformative for students and for teachers going through or implementing a different unique component of blended learning into their classrooms. So you kind of have an idea of how this could look or what this could kind of be like. And again, the key here is making sure that you have those set expectations early on and that you're giving students an opportunity to move through content in a way that makes sense for them. The next piece we'll look at here is the individual rotation model here. I like this graphic. I think it gives you a really solid idea of how, A, this model can look, but I also think it can give you an idea of what a space planning might look like, because what's unique about the individual rotation model here is that this is much more of a student-driven model. So the focus here could be placed on individual student to move from, hey, small group instruction, a direct instruction lab, to, hey, I got to move to my group project here in the next half hour I'm working with students. And you know what? After lunch, I'm transitioning to my central learning lab to work on some online-based content. So I can provide that data, get that feedback from my instructors to help make those instructional decisions moving forward. A unique setup, a unique setting, and the sites who do this typically do it really well, but they begin this implementation with the end in mind, right? They know they want to begin this individual rotation model. It's a really cool model to implement, and I think some of the benefits and considerations listed there laid out really nicely for you. So we've covered some ground here in a short amount of time. I think everyone's got a much firmer idea now, a good grounding exercise there on what those rotational models really are. I thought it'd be really helpful for you to see some of the research then that kind of supports the effectiveness of these models. So what you're looking at here is a really nice graphic from what we call the proof points, and the proof points were done as a part of a research study by the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation. You can see there's a link below there for you. And these proof points go through and really highlight sites that have shown great, terrific gains and can show you exactly what that program has done and the results behind it. And I think that the results in this case really speak for themselves, right? So you're looking at this site in Hamilton County here in Illinois where they focus on a station rotation model really heavily. They transition, they create those dynamic or flexible grouping models, and they inform that direct instruction based upon the feedback that they received in that online world. And the results, again, speak for themselves, right? The gains there of triple digits are pronounced, and you're seeing them both in math and reading. Those are gains that are not just isolated, right, to this Hamilton County School District. They're gains that are being seen everywhere. And those folks who implement these models in unique or kind of non-traditional ways are seeing the same thing. But I think that this gives you that back end, right? That solidifies that process of implementing blended learning in a room in your classroom at your site can be really effective. And again, the results here speak for themselves. So you've seen the models. You've got a really good idea now of why they work, right? What makes them effective. Now, how do I go through and implement these, right? So really to summarize some of these critical elements for success, I wanted to work and break these down into kind of school-based and then online curriculum-based elements. So you have a really solid idea of what the two of these can do. So in a school-based element, obviously it's crucial to make sure you have the vision, right? You have the flexibility. You have a staff who is really excited and flexible and willing to try something unique or different. From an online content standpoint, it's crucial that there are abilities for quick access to student data, that the assessments are relative to students' needs and interests, and that you have some grouping tools, right? Some ability for your teachers to take that data, aggregate it, and move it to where it might need to be. So there really, is a lot going on here. You can see that it takes a lot to implement these models, but when you walk down that process, when you start to move through this process, you can go through and adapt and make these models really fit your site to make sure that they're specific to you and your students going forward. A lot going on here, okay? We have created a document that really outlines all of these pieces really nicely. Again, it's located in that Documents tab for you. I don't want you to be sitting there writing as fast as you possibly can, making your hands sore. So be sure to know that we got those things in the back pocket there for you. Terrific. So kind of moving to the next component here, we're going to start to talk a little bit about some additional models. The next model we're going to look at here, another popular blended learning model, is that flex model. And really in this model, students are moving in that individually or customized schedule, where a majority of that curriculum was delivered online. So the face-to-face teachers are there to provide support, but they're really there kind of as the back end, so you have a really good idea of what that's going to look like. We've got some additional terrific questions coming in here today. Another question just came in. We can talk a little bit about here. Brett put a nice question here. How does Study Island as a program become a strong instructional element in the classroom? That's a terrific question. And there are a lot of ways, Brett, to go through and implement that platform or that program. It can be used as an anticipatory set for some of these lessons, maybe the direct instruction as students move into a station rotation model. It's a great way to go through in, say, a flex model and give students an opportunity to practice or get ready for those high-stakes assessments. There's a ton of spots where those can fit. And I'll be honest, Brett, that would be a question I'd be more than happy to take with you two offline. So don't hesitate. I'll get my contact information out to you here at the end, and we can highlight that a bit more. Terrific. Got a couple more questions coming in. Boy, even just terrific questions coming in. So Ashley asked a terrific question. Can those of us who have purchased Edmentum programs in our county, can we use these slides to share with our teachers in training? You absolutely can, Ashley. This is why we want to develop this for you to take back. And if you want me to help you customize this even further, by all means, make sure you get a hold of me. We'll walk you through that piece as well. Terrific. Well, thank you again for chatting some of these in. These are terrific questions moving forward. Let's keep going down that pace of our flex model to give us a solid idea of kind of what that's all about and what it can look like. Again, as I said earlier, most of that curriculum in a flex model is delivered online, right? So your face-to-face teachers, they give you support, they give you some direct instruction, they act even as cheerleaders, right, through those face-to-face tutoring sessions or small group sessions. And what the benefits here include are that individualization of schedules. And it gives you some more flexibility as a district from a staffing needs perspective, because you can be a bit more flexible and you can get an idea here what it could look like, right? So we're going to start with the students starting in a tutorial in a small classroom, but they're really working on their own. Then they go through they meet individually with those teachers, look at progress, see where some of those gaps might be, celebrate those successes, and let the student go back and move in that mastery test or that formative assessment piece on their own moving forward. Again, that student agency in a flex model is a big part of what you're looking at. Another great graphic here that kind of gives you an idea. And really, in this model, online learning is that backbone of student learning here. Really, it's really focused here on giving students that ability. And what's so unique about this is the way you can structure different environments for students to move through this content. So if you look, you can really get a good idea of how a student can move, again, from a social area to small one-to-one, meetings with teachers, to breakout rooms or work collaboratively with their peers, and then go back into those collaborative spaces with the thought process. They're working on a lot of that content through online components. I think, to me at least, this flex model, while there are a ton of benefits and considerations here, I think for me it's really helpful to see that visually what it can look like. And in the flex model, one of the bigger models were having some of those backwards design, traits in mind when you're thinking about how am I going to set this up, right? What's this going to look like? I think that this flex building setup gives you a solid idea of, different zones, right? What could look like from kind of a 10,000 foot view if I wanted to go through and set up some different features, set up some different zones, and really make sure my students are getting exactly what they need moving forward. I put a couple graphics in here for you as well. A lot of people look at this and say, boy, this doesn't necessarily look like a traditional classroom. It looks more like an office. And in a lot of ways it does, right? You're looking at students working in some smaller cubes, a lot more autonomy when it comes to students' ability to move through content, to move through different spaces in some cases. And you can see how that setup lends itself to students working both individually but also collaboratively. Here's another graphic where a student might be moving then from those individual spaces to more of a teacher-led station where, again, they have an opportunity to work more one-to-one, giving students the ability to work with teachers or subject matter experts in a way maybe that they haven't been able to before, or give students who maybe haven't been successful in the traditional classroom another way to access educators or another way to build relationships with teachers moving forward. So a lot coming at you there, but I think those graphics show a solid view of what a flex model could look like. Going back to some of those critical elements for some implementation success, I think they're laid out really nicely here. We talked about the space planning being a huge aspect of that. Giving students access to those subject matter experts is crucial because you're giving more access to teachers. You're giving more time for one-on-one conversations, for opportunities to build those relationships for students moving forward. Knowing, though, that that backbone of this model is online curriculum, it is absolutely essential that you're looking and selecting and providing your students high-quality instructional content that is aligned not just to state and national standards, but is also engaging for students to move through and also allows students the opportunity to look at and see progress as they're moving forward. It is absolutely essential that those are big pieces simply because students are receiving a majority, if not all of their content in most cases, online. So terrific going through, looking at a variety of rotational, flexible flex models. Let's move to some a la carte models here. And a la carte models, to me, is a terrific way for schools to really start to dip their proverbial toes into the blended learning pool. And often, really, you can create a variation of this model to really fit your site, your need. It doesn't have to look exactly like we're going to outline here today. But I think a lot of folks on the call might already be doing something along these lines, and they're just not necessarily labeling it a blended learning instruction. So in the a la carte model, you're looking where a student takes one or more of these courses entirely online, while at the same time continuing to have that brick and mortar educational experience or working with those educators in those one-to-one settings. So for a lot of folks, this could look like a credit recovery lab, for instance. It can look like an opportunity for students to earn first-time credit acquisition, but also take their regular schedule of classes in the high school, for instance. Lots of options from this a la carte model, but I think it's a great way for sites to start implementing this blended learning aspect in their classroom. So again, you're taking one or more of those courses entirely online. You've got a teacher of record in most cases, and in most cases it's a brick and mortar teacher who's working with them, but students are having those brick and mortar educational experiences as well, right? They're a part of that school, they're a part of those classrooms. They're just taking additional online course either on campus or in some cases off-site as well. So what you're looking at here is an opportunity to observe what that could look like, right? Where a student begins working on a CTE course, for instance, from their school's library or possibly computer lab, and then that student transitions right back into a different period or a different subset of their day and takes the rest of their core courses in the traditional classroom. But again, built into that student's schedule is an opportunity to take that online course. Then the student and teacher then communicate through email, through collaboration spaces in some cases, and through a variety of graded activities, if not in most cases face-to-face. It's an opportunity for students to get those 21st century skills, to practice what it's going to take to be an online learner in an environment that's really conducive to success for students who are already accustomed to that brick and mortar experience. Again, a nice graphic here, I think, that shows some of the solid benefits and considerations moving forward. Looking at this thinking, all right, I could implement this, right? We have access, to a lab in some cases at sites, or we have access to giving students maybe Chromebooks to take home. You're also providing that online instructor in some cases. So if you're not able to support, or if a student wants, let's say, a global language that you just don't have to be able to support, you can do some of those things using online teachers or using a teacher of record on your site to help go through and give schedule flexibility for students kind of moving forward. So it gives you, I think, a solid overview of what an a la carte model could look like. And again, I'm sure some folks are look at this thinking, hey, we're already doing this. Like, we're doing this really effectively. It's great to hear that we're doing some aspect of blended learning, but maybe there's some things that we could shore up or do a little different. I want to tie this back, though, this model, right back to the research that supports why blended learning as an instructional technique is so effective. And that's where this proof point comes back into play, like we looked at a little bit earlier today from the Clayton Christensen Institute. This one is much more focused on the a la carte model in particular. So this is Mooresville in North Carolina. And what I really like about this proof point is the time frame at which the study was conducted. So we're looking at a 7-year time frame, so you know that there's some deep research there. This site focused on a really aggressive one-to-one initiative. They provided their educators with a ton of professional development experiences, which are absolutely essential and crucial when you're implementing a blended learning technique or set of techniques into your site. And they focus on that a la carte model in the middle and high school simply because of the flexibility it offered this site. And I think looking at the results here, you're looking again that they start to speak for themselves, right? You're looking at an increased graduation rates when it comes to the high school. You're looking at third grade proficiency just overall, right? We're talking across subjects, moving from a 77 to 89%. Really proof positive that implementing these blended learning techniques, and in this case, the a la carte method, could be a really successful way to go through and implement some unique or different strategies into your site. So I hope that gives a solid overview. Again, now you're thinking, all right, I've got the models, right? I know exactly what this kind of looks like from an a la carte standpoint. I've got the research that supports it. What is it going to take for me, right? What do I need to be thinking about if I'm going through and want to implement this in a variety of ways? Now we're looking at some of those critical elements again for an implementation success, and we're talking about the school-based elements. So we're looking at making sure you've got a lab coordinator or at least access to some technology for students, but a lab coordinator that is going to be somebody who can help students navigate if this might be their first opportunity to work in an online environment, help them build those 21st century learning skills so they can move forward. From an online content standpoint, again, a lot of what we've talked about, but making sure that those courses, that content that students are moving through is absolutely the best you can provide for them, that it's standards-based, that it's engaging, that it's going to keep that student moving through. And again, this model, for a variety of reasons, I think is terrific to start with, but I also think it really gives your students an opportunity to experience online learning, right? So in most cases, if your students are in high school and they have any aspirations, to attend some higher education or post-secondary school, online learning or online coursework is inevitably going to be a part of that post-secondary world, okay? And this model lets students experience that type of learning, okay, as they're progressing in a brick and mortar setting. So they feel really comfortable moving forward, and they get into those situations in an online environment and they don't feel like this is the first time they've been there. So it's an opportunity for you as educators and school districts to support your students and give them opportunities that they might not just have been able to have in the past. Okay. We're clipping right along, and I want to kind of move to this last model, and I like this last model because I think it ties things together really nicely. The last model we're going to focus on here is the Enriched-Virtual Model, and really what separates this model from the others is that in this model, all of the curriculum is delivered online in that virtual setting. So your students will work remotely and occasionally have those face-to-face check-ins with the administrator or with the lab coordinator or with the educator who's supporting that course. It's a bigger shift, right? It's a little bit more pronounced because of all of that content is being delivered online in that virtual setting to a student. And in most cases, when you're looking at this enriched virtual model, the students are working remotely. A lot of benefits here, we'll talk about some of those, but I want to give you a snapshot of what this could look like so you can try and get a little context and think about what this could be like in your classroom. So in this situation, we're thinking where students are meeting in that class, right? We're kicking off that English 9 course, maybe together. We're laying out expectations for the remainder of that class, remainder of the year, but then the students then go back, whether they're working from home, whether they're in other settings, they're going to complete the rest of those lessons, the rest of that coursework off-site, right? Not in that brick and mortar location. Students then have the opportunity, which I think is unique here, to go back and maybe work in a classroom or work with some content matter or subject matter experts or teachers who are saying, hey, I could provide some office hours for you to help supplement or support students moving through here. But again, in this enriched virtual model, you're really looking at those students working off-site. And again, some of the benefits here, I think, as we're starting to go through are pretty apparent to begin with, but you're looking at the benefits where those learners are able to complete most of that coursework on their own schedule. So if you have students who, for a variety of reasons, whether they're health reasons or otherwise, can't be on site, they're going to have their own schedules. And they're going to still need that content, that high quality coursework. They're going to need that instruction. The enriched virtual model gives you a way to provide that content while still allowing that student to be a part of your school, right? They're still going to be a part of that experience in some cases, whether it's, playing in sporting events or attending prom. They have that opportunity to be a part of it, but they're taking that content off-site. I think that this benefits and considerations slide here kind of lays it out really nicely for you as to what that could look like. A lot of folks start to ask a little bit about, okay, how could this really look, right? Because if I have the online content, or if I already have some of this courseware, but I might not have a teacher who's certified or the ability to go through and support that class, how would I start to implement this model? How would I start to transition to an enriched virtual model? In a lot of cases, sites will partner with sites such as, in this case, Adoptions Academy, where Adoptions Academy is a fully accredited virtual school that actually provides content and courseware and a state-approved instructor to help go through and provide that content to students and to sites who are looking for something unique or different. In other cases, you'll see where virtual programs already have an online courseware at their site or school, and those instructors that are traditionally brick and mortar teachers maybe moonlight or do something on the lines of supporting this classroom virtually after hours, or create some office hours throughout the day to support this. So there's a variety of ways to do this. A lot of sites who want to take that progression from starting in a blended learning environment to maybe moving to a more in-depth enriched virtual model and say, you know what, maybe we want to take even the next step to go through and say, maybe we want to try opening our own virtual school or make this an extension of our existing district. This is kind of that step 2 in that 3-step process, right? That first one being implementing a blended learning technique, then going through and refining it, like in this case, an enriched virtual model, and then saying, you know what, I think we're prepared. We've got enough depth of knowledge here to start moving to that online instruction and maybe opening our own virtual school together. So a very different model, but one I think that a lot of folks can go through and implement with a lot of success. And when you're thinking about this model, we're really focusing on providing those high-quality educators, right? Those high-quality teachers, making sure the access to technology is there. But you can see where that focus, that emphasis here is really on those online curriculum elements, because we got to make sure when all that content is being provided to those students virtually, that content is standards-based, that I mentioned earlier, that's engaging for students to move through, but it also has to provide opportunities for students to see their data, to see their success, to find or highlight weaknesses so you can help as an educator and pinpoint what those are and help students move through. That access to real-time data and reporting really permeates throughout the entire blended learning model process. But again, when you're working in a virtual or online setting, it becomes even more pronounced. So it's an opportunity to go through and highlight student success moving forward. So we've covered some serious ground here, guys, and I think we've got some terrific questions coming in. I do want to take a moment here, though, and go through and just put this slide up so you can see kind of all of these here. We really started highlighting that rotation model to begin with. We then transitioned into a bit more depth around the flex model and what that can look like with those students who really have a lot more agency, not only about the content that they're working through, but also about their movements possibly in that lab or classroom model. Then we transitioned to that a la carte model. And I think that a la carte model is one that hopefully a lot of this group were able to identify with and say, you know what, maybe we're doing aspects of this, or this is what we want to get to provide maybe a summer school program for our students, or maybe we want to do something where we allow students the opportunity to earn some first-time credit doing this or something different. A lot of options there, all the way to the enriched virtual model, but we're really focusing on that. All of that content is online, and we're really saying, you know what, we're going to give students an even higher degree of choice and really help prepare students as they move on to the next part of their education career, whether it's post-secondary or otherwise, to make sure that they're prepared as 21st century learners to get into that content and really be successful in what they're doing. So we have really gone through and covered a lot of models. Don't hesitate as we're going through. If you have some specific questions that are popping into chat, by all means, go ahead and type those things in as we're going through. We want to make sure we get those put in. But I've gone through a lot of models, and I'm sure as you've gone through here today, you've seen some things that you may have recognized or that have jumped out at you. So I want to take a second and just see if there's somebody on the call here. Is there a volunteer that would like to go through and say, you know what, I'd like to kind of share the model or the concept or the implementation that you're trying to do at your site, or I want to start to think about how we could do this at ours and some success maybe that you've had around it, or even some challenges that you've experienced. Part of what's so unique is we have a large group of folks on today who I think have a varied amount of experience. So if you do, by all means, want to hop off, mute, and talk really quickly, if you have the capability to do that, by all means do that. Otherwise, you can type it in the chat. We can go through here as well and jump into those as well. So I'll give just a second if you want to do that, and that's okay too. You can always type in a chat, and we'll make sure we give an opportunity here at the end for folks to go through and type in questions if they have some more specific ones moving forward. Terrific. All right, well, again, if somebody does want to hop off, we can stop and come right back. Oh, looks like we've got some folks typing into the chat here. Yeah, so we got some people going through and asking some solid questions. Yes, yep, you'll have to raise your hand. So a question came in saying, hey, how can we hop off? If we have a question we want to post in there, if you want to go through and hop off mute, you'll just have to raise your hand there on that little right-hand side, and we'll jump you off mute. Otherwise, we can wait to hop off as near the end of today's session as well. Perfect. Thank you for that question. All right, so I want to kind of transition a little bit here because we've got a solid idea of exactly what these models can kind of look like, right? We've talked a lot about what the models can be, kind of some ways to kind of navigate to there. Let's say you're a little farther down the line here. And I know a lot of folks who typed in the chat here really focused on saying, hey, we're just starting this process, right? We are just beginning on trying to implement this. So we want to know when we start this process, what should we be looking for? So if you're already practicing one or more of these models, let's try and look at just a couple things that you can expect to see if you've already implemented this blended learning model at your site or across your district. So if you're a little farther down the line, if you've implemented one or more of these models in your room and you're feeling pretty comfortable, now you want to start to see how can we refine this process? How can we make this practice as effective as possible? How can we coach and lead our educators in a way that makes the most sense, in a way that helps them grow in this model? So I wanted to put together a couple slides here that'll help you move really from that initial, hey, this is where we want to start from our process to a practice. Another great question just came in before we jump into this piece here. The question came in again from Brittany, which is terrific. What if you want to do a rotation model, but you only have one classroom of space to work with? Does anybody have any recommendations on the call? And I would love for folks to type in their chats here as well. That is, space is always a challenge, Brittany, when you're coming through and you want to do that rotational model. In some instances where I've seen this be really successful is where folks kind of change the rotation model from that one classroom and they go through and kind of make a hybrid of both the station rotation model and the lab rotation model. What I mean by that is really going through and creating some small flexible grouping based upon students' assessment or high-stakes assessment data. And then you can take those students, and if it's just the one space, you could have students transition in and out of that larger lab as a part of a station rotation. So it's a little bit more in depth, right? It's tweaked a little bit, but it gives you a lot of flexibility, and you can make that one space be that online learning lab while giving some more opportunities. Terrific. And Brittany put a good piece up. My kids have their own iPads. Brittany, that gives you a distinct advantage over other folks too, because you got a lot more flexibility there. In that case, you could even think about taking it a step further and saying, maybe that station rotation model looks a little different in the sense that students might not rotate as much as they're rotating on a schedule, right? So they might not be getting up and physically moving because of the space, issues that you might be having, but that schedule is set up where you're saying, all right, I need, the red group to log into this piece of the content, start working through the tutorial, or I need folks to work on this aspect. So you're creating a rotation model, but you're doing it based upon time rather than maybe than space or location. That is a great question, Brittany. And again, yeah, terrific. Great. I put in some nice comments and feedback, so I appreciate that, Brittany, and no worries. I know you can't speak. That's okay right now, not a problem. I appreciate you typing in. This is terrific. So for folks too who are or come up with some of those challenges, if you have more of these too, by all means type them in a chat, and I'll make sure that myself and my colleagues are available today and after today too for even more one-on-one in-depth conversations if you need it. So to kind of talk a little bit more about those sites that are a little farther down the road, right, in terms of blended learning and looking at, implementing this in some different ways, you want to see what you're necessarily looking for, right? So I want to say, how do I go through and talk a little bit about what should I look for? How do I know if my site is doing this well, or how can I give constructive feedback? And this is what you're looking for, right? More data analysis, more opportunities for your educators to look at the data effectively and move forward, much more feedback for your students, and more choice, more student agency moving forward for students are absolutely crucial. This is unique, right? This is a different shift for folks, right, than that stand and deliver, than that direct instruction. So when you start to shift to that student control as being a really core attribute of blended learning in your classroom, it doesn't necessarily mean that students are just, free to do whatever they want, whenever they want, run amok, right? That's not the way it goes. The teacher still needs to have that control, and they need to act more as facilitator, more as the guide on that learning process for students, taking into consideration student personalities, taking into consideration student data, and all the opportunities they have to experience really those one-on-one conversations with students to make that experience for your students really as personalized as it can possibly be. So you're looking here at some choice for students, right? You're looking at that path, that pace, the location, and you're looking at the monitoring component as well. So you're looking at something even a little bit more deep and what this could look like. Cynthia just typed in a terrific question here asking, what types of feedback would we use? Paper-based student learning, inventories, exit tickets, any ideas? Cynthia, you laid out two excellent ones there with the exit tickets and really that paper-based student learning. The feedback, though, can convert in a variety of methods, and I think a couple of those don't always necessarily need to be just, focused on that exit ticket component. It can also be sitting down with the student, having a conversation about what are we going to look at for the next 3 weeks, right? A conversation that I saw recently in a blended learning classroom that made me really stop and think about some different ways it can be used is the teacher sat down with an individual student and said, you know what? Here's what we're going to focus on the next 3 weeks, okay, in terms of our scope and sequence. I want you to be thinking about these things coming forward, right? I want you to be thinking about, we're going to be talking about, fractions in the next 3 weeks here. Start be looking for that content. Giving students an opportunity to get in front of some of that content is a way to go through and give students choice, give them an opportunity to go through and engage with the students moving forward. That is terrific. Another one came in that I think was just terrific here, saying the featured item analysis is quite useful for grouping purposes or reemphasizing a particular topic not yet mastered. I love that item analysis component because you're really digging in there into individual students' needs. You're really digging into what those students are looking for. Another terrific comment that I sure do appreciate that. So when you're combining the student choice, and you're combining that engaging and monitoring from a educator's perspective, you're really shifting that paradigm for students. You're giving students empowerment in ways maybe that they're not accustomed to, but it really can shift the way you provide instruction, the way you go through and tailor what you do each and every single day. So hopefully this kind of gives you a little bit more of an idea of, okay, what is it going to look like, right, day to day? How can I measure the effectiveness? And there, unfortunately, due to time, I would love to go even deeper, but we're going to have more webinars around topics like this. I really like the idea of focusing too on different strategies like exit tickets to employ, different ways to create those experiences, those interactions with students in different ways. So we will absolutely cover those in more depth moving forward. One piece I want to highlight here, and I think we touched on this earlier today, but I think it bears repeating again. Simply adding technology to your classroom, to your district, really is not blended learning, right? That's what we call a technology-rich environment. When you actually want to implement blended learning, okay, you're going through and you're increasing the ability for students to move through at their own pace, right? Their own place, maybe they're going to work off-site, and they can choose a path. Or you're going to make some data-driven discussions or decisions. I have been in rooms where you have seen, a large set of iPads, and they're just simply used for students to play games on, right? We're not getting that education-based themes or content that are being hit on for students. We're not allowing for educators to receive data to make actionable decisions. Those are crucial pieces. So I like this slide because I think it helps set that kind of demarcation line between what is blended learning and what is just that integration, okay, and really focusing, because if there's really no specific educational goal and flexibility for students is maybe not increased, then we're not adding, we're just simply adding technology for technology's sake. We're not actually increasing blended learning. It's a really solid way to think about what blended learning can be like and how it can look. Terrific. So I'm going to move on here really quickly, and then we're going to get some time for questions here at the end because we've got some great questions coming in. I want to make sure we highlight all of these kind of moving forward. So really, when you're looking at this, we've got a lot here coming at you, right? this is really only the beginning. We've kind of put a lot into this today, but I want to give you really that solid foundation of what the models can look like, of what the research says, of what to look for if you're implementing some of these things. You know, we know what teachers need is that data collection. We know that they need to go through and provide that content or ongoing feedback to students. And we know that administrators have a different set of needs, right? They need help and support for planning these blended learning implementations on a district-wide level. They're always looking for ways to streamline processes and make things more effective for students and teachers. So they're very different needs going forward, but this is really what we want to help do. Is provide the feedback, provide and fill those gaps for students and help build that compendium of information going forward. And really with that being said, we've really gone through and wanted to kind of push it back to this group a little bit and saying, well, this is only the beginning. We'd also like you to take the lead in a sense. And what we mean by that is we'd like to drive more of these webinars, more of this conversation moving forward. And we like to drive in a way that makes sense for you, for this group specifically. And I think the best way to do that is to put this in a poll form. So this poll here, what we're looking for is what topics are most interesting to you for the upcoming webinars and for trainings here at Edmentum. By all means, go ahead and select your top two most desirable topics. And we're going to use those to really frame for what we're looking for, what we want to highlight.
Yeah, so the poll should be up on your screen. I see we got about 20% or so voted, so take just a second. I know there's a lot of options. I'm actually going to ask this question twice because we had more ideas than we could handle for things that we thought that might be beneficial. So take a look, answer your top two that you would like, and then we'll close this one and open another, and you'll pick your next two from those. I want to give enough time for everybody to read the options and make their choices. Okay, I'm going to close out this poll, and then I'm going to go ahead. I'm not going to share those answers. I'm going to post the next one and launch that one. That way, remember, this is all about what do you want to see, essentially in our June webinar. What topic should we focus on? You can pick two that would be most of interest from this as well. And we'll give a couple of seconds for all the answers to come in for that. It's quite a range. It's kind of interesting. You know, you want to see what your colleagues are most interested in, and essentially it looks like, Tony, we could benefit from talking about every one of these subjects.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
So I'm going to close this one out too for the purposes of being able to kind of let us keep moving. We'll take the information and aggregate it just so that you all know, and that's what's going to kind of drive, like we mentioned, June and July and August, getting us through those summer months to give you the professional development that you're aiming for and make it as relevant as possible. But I do want to also let you know that we already do have 2 webinars that are planned and launching pretty quickly. So next week we have our Chief Academic Officer, Dave Adams, talking about ESSA. What does it mean for you? What does it mean for kind of the future of education? So if that's a topic that you mentioned that you'd be interested in, we already have it for you. So you can go to edmentum.com to look up that. It'll also be in a link in the email that you received from us. And then the second one that we're launching in May is on formative assessment, now what? So you have all of this data coming to you from formative assessment tools. How do you interpret it? What does that mean for student outcomes? How do you connect it and make sure the content is meeting the students' needs? That one's going to be May 17th at 11 Central Time. So you'll receive a link to do the registration on both of these, but I wanted to at least get them to you so you have them on your calendars. Couple of things just to tying in. You know, I really appreciate Tony sharing his expertise today, and wanted to just kind of wrap up with talking about, you know, these webinars are sponsored by Edmentum. Edmentum's mission, we're founded on innovation, committed to being educators' most trusted partner in creating successful student outcomes everywhere learning occurs. As Tony mentioned in the webinar, you are not alone. We combine our experience and our technology with a top-notch implementation approach focused on your needs. If you are an Edmentum customer currently and you feel like you're missing something from an implementation standpoint, reach out because we are more than happy to take your implementation to the next level. That is the Edmentum difference. So Tony's still here on the line, as am I. Do you have any questions? We'll wrap up. We'll get back to those questions that are entered in as well. Feel free, enter them in the chat. Raise your hand if you have additional questions that you want to say verbally as well. And thank you all very much for attending.
It's terrific. Got some great feedback coming in here today. I really appreciate it. A couple nice comments coming in here. You know, I got a great comment in here. I find quite useful the message feature, or to keep my kiddos' confidentiality private and to be able to assist him or her at a more personal, tailored level. I'm assuming that you're referring to the message center message feature within your platform that you're using there. Specifically in 4th grade, they're becoming more and more self-aware and self-conscious of what others think. I think that's a terrific comment, and it's very, you know, I think it really highlights that individual student need and what they're looking for, but I also think it's a creative way to kind of build those connections in a virtual space. That's a terrific comment. Thank you so much for the nice comments. I really appreciate it. I'd be more than happy to go through and really go through and focus on some more questions if you have specifically for me or for your site. We'd be more than happy to take it. I, again, appreciate all the kind comments coming in today, that's for sure. If you are interested in getting a hold of me or others here at Edmentum, by all means, we'd love to hear from you. And here's the information about me and how to get a hold of me. And then if you have some questions about upcoming webinars, you can reach us here as well.
Yes, so you have earned one continuing education unit for your participation today. What we ask is when we close out the webinar, you'll receive a survey immediately. If you fill that out and submit it back, then within 1 week, you'll get the survey sent to you, as well as an email that has the recording link, the PowerPoint slides, as well as additional resources that we thought might be helpful in your implementation or beginning an implementation for blended learning. Don't forget, before you log off, to go to that handout section and download those two resources, one about those critical elements for implementation success and aggregating that information as a checklist when you're reviewing your provider, as well as the document that kind of outlines these blended learning models in a little bit more of a job aid format, so you can keep it at your desk or keep it in your planning sessions with your other teachers or administrators. We really want to say thank you so very much for attending today. We look forward to having you on future webinars. Feel free, reach out to Professional Development pd@edmentum.com, or if you want any specific questions for Tony, his email is written on there, tony.scaugi@edmentum.com as well. We will stay on the line for a couple of additional minutes, but if anybody has any questions, feel free. If not, thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for being educators in this world.